There are legends whose names are carved into the very foundation of action cinema, and then there is Jean-Claude Van Damme, a man whose story is as explosive as the kicks that made him famous. For decades, he was the muscles from Brussels, the martial arts icon who brought a new kind of power and poetry to the big screen. But behind the high-flying splits, the blockbuster movies and the global fame, lies a journey marked by heartbreak, loss, and a relentless fight for redemption. Now at 64, the world sees a different Van Damme, one whose battles are no longer just on screen but within his own life. This is the untold story of what happened to Jean-Claude Van Damme, a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the man behind the legend. Try not to cry when you see the truth. Jean-Claude Van Damme's journey began far from the glitz of Hollywood. Born in 1960 in Sint-Agatha-Berchem, a quiet suburb of Brussels, Belgium, Jean-Claude Camille François van Varenberg was a shy, sensitive boy. His father, Eugène, ran a flower shop and his mother, Eliana, was a homemaker. Life was simple but not easy. Jean-Claude struggled to fit in. He was small, frail, and often the target of bullies. The world saw weakness, but inside a fire was building, a desire to prove himself, to become someone no one could ignore. At age 10, his father enrolled him in karate classes, hoping to toughen him up. What began as a way to defend himself quickly became an obsession. Jean-Claude trained relentlessly, spending hours perfecting his form, his kicks, his discipline. Martial arts became his sanctuary, a place where he could transform pain into power. By his teens he was winning tournaments, earning black belts, and building a reputation as a prodigy. But even as trophies filled his shelves, Jean-Claude felt the weight of expectation. He dreamed of something bigger, something beyond Belgium, beyond the limits of his small world. That dream came at a cost. Jean-Claude's relationship with his father was strained. Eugène wanted his son to take over the family business, to live a safe, predictable life. But Jean-Claude's heart was set on the impossible, Hollywood. At 19 he left everything behind, family, friends, security, and boarded a plane to America with little more than a gym bag and a head full of hope. The city of angels was unforgiving. Jean-Claude spoke little English, had no connections, and slept in cheap motels, sometimes even in his car. The glamour of Hollywood was a mirage. The reality was hunger, rejection, and endless struggle. But Van Damme was no stranger to adversity. He took odd jobs, pizza delivery, carpet cleaner, nightclub bouncer, anything to survive. He haunted casting calls, showing off his splits and kicks, desperate for a break. For years the doors stayed closed. The world saw a foreigner with a funny accent and a bodybuilder's physique, not a future star. But Jean-Claude refused to give up. Every no fueled his determination. Every setback became a lesson in resilience. The breakthrough finally came in 1988, when he landed the lead role in Bloodsport. The film was low budget, the odds stacked against it, but Jean-Claude's charisma and athleticism electrified audiences. Overnight, he became a sensation. The Muscles from Brussels was born. Suddenly, Hollywood couldn't get enough. Kickboxer, Lionheart, Double Impact, Universal Soldier, each film cemented his status as an action icon. For a moment it seemed Jean-Claude had everything he ever wanted, fame, fortune, and the adoration of millions. But the higher he climbed, the more fragile his world became. Behind the scenes, the pressures of stardom began to take their toll. The boy who once fought bullies in Brussels now faced new enemies: addiction, loneliness, and the relentless demands of an industry that chews up its heroes and spits them out. Jean-Claude's life was spiraling, even as his star continued to rise. The 1990s should have been Jean-Claude Van Damme's golden era. He was everywhere, on magazine covers, in blockbuster films, and on red carpets around the world. But behind the scenes the cracks were beginning to show. The pressure to stay on top was immense. Every new movie had to be bigger, every stunt more dangerous, every performance more intense. Hollywood's love is fickle, and Jean-Claude felt it slipping through his fingers with every passing year. Fame brought its own set of temptations. The parties were endless, the expectations even higher. Jean-Claude, who had once been a shy, disciplined martial artist, found himself swept up in a whirlwind of excess. He began using cocaine at first to keep up with the grueling schedules, then to numb the pain of loneliness and anxiety. The addiction took hold quickly, And soon the man who had built his body into a weapon found himself powerless against his own demons. His personal life was unraveling just as fast. Jean-Claude's relationships were stormy and short-lived. He married 5 times, each union marked by passion, conflict, and heartbreak. The tabloids feasted on his troubles, painting him as a playboy, a bad boy, a star out of control. But the truth was far more complicated. Jean-Claude was searching for something he couldn't find in fame or fortune, a sense of belonging, a place to call home. The more he chased happiness, the more it seemed to slip away. The work never stopped. Jean-Claude threw himself into film after film, sometimes working on multiple projects at once. The physical toll was brutal. Years of martial arts stunts and injuries left his body battered. He suffered from chronic pain, torn muscles, and a back that ached with every move. But he refused to slow down. The fear of fading into obscurity was greater than any physical agony. Hollywood is a place where yesterday's hero is quickly forgotten, and Jean-Claude was determined not to become a footnote. But the cost was mounting. By the late 1990s, his career was in freefall. The big studios stopped calling. The budgets shrank, the scripts got worse, and the roles became parodies of his former glory. Jean-Claude was forced to take whatever work he could get, often in direct-to-video films that barely made a ripple. The critics were merciless. The fans, once so loyal, began to drift away. The Muscles from Brussels was no longer the king of the box office. He was a cautionary tale. The pain of this fall was almost unbearable. Jean-Claude had sacrificed everything for his dream, his health, his relationships, his peace of mind. Now, at the age of 40, he found himself alone, addicted, and nearly broke. The world that had once cheered his every move now seemed to have forgotten him. The loneliness was crushing. There were nights when Jean-Claude stared at the ceiling, wondering if he would ever find his way back. But even in the darkest moments, the fighter in him refused to die. Jean-Claude checked himself into rehab, determined to break free from the chains of addiction. It was a brutal process, days filled with pain, regret, and the slow, agonizing work of healing. But for the first time in years he began to see a glimmer of hope. He reconnected with his children, reaching out to repair the bonds that fame and addiction had broken. He started training again, not for a role but for himself, for the boy who had once dreamed of being a hero. The comeback was slow, and the world was skeptical. But Jean-Claude Van Damme had never been one to quit. He began taking smaller roles, working with new directors, and embracing the humility that comes with starting over. The journey back to the spotlight was not about reclaiming old glory, but about finding peace with who he had become. The man who once conquered Hollywood was now fighting for something far more precious, his own soul. As the new millennium dawned, Jean-Claude Van Damme found himself at a crossroads. The world had changed, and so had he. The action heroes of the 80s and 90s were fading from the spotlight, replaced by new faces and new franchises. For many, this would have been the end. A slow fade into obscurity, a quiet retirement far from the cameras. But for Jean-Claude, the fight was far from over. He knew that if he was going to survive, he had to reinvent himself, not just as an actor, but as a man. The first step was acceptance. Jean-Claude could no longer pretend to be the invincible warrior of his youth. The years of physical punishment had left their mark. His body, once a temple of strength, now bore the scars of countless battles on screen and off. He spoke openly about his struggles with depression, addiction, and the pain of growing older in an industry obsessed with youth. For the first time he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to show the world the man behind the muscles. This honesty resonated with fans in a way that his movies never could. People saw themselves in his struggles, the fear of failure, the regret of past mistakes, the longing for redemption. Jean-Claude began to embrace roles that reflected this new reality. In 2008, he starred in JCVD, a film that blurred the line between fiction and autobiography, playing a version of himself, a washed-up action star caught in a real-life crisis. Jean-Claude delivered a performance that stunned critics and audiences alike. The film was raw, emotional, and deeply human. For the first time, the world saw not just a fighter, but a survivor. JCVD marked a turning point. It was no longer about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about being real. Jean-Claude started to rebuild his career, one honest step at a time. He took on projects that challenged him, worked with directors who valued his experience, and mentored young actors who grew up idolizing him. He became a symbol of resilience, proof that it's never too late to start over. But the journey was not without setbacks. The film industry is unforgiving, and the shadow of his past mistakes lingered. There were still moments of doubt, still nights when the loneliness crept in. Jean-Claude's relationships remained complicated. He struggled to balance his career with his responsibilities as a father and partner. The scars of old wounds, failed marriages, broken friendships, lost opportunities, were never far from the surface. Yet through it all, Jean-Claude found strength in the very things that once threatened to destroy him. He became an advocate for mental health, speaking candidly about his battles with bipolar disorder and the importance of seeking help. He used his platform to encourage others to face their own struggles, to fight for their own second chances. The man who once defined himself by his physical power now found meaning in vulnerability, in honesty, in the quiet courage of simply carrying on. At 64, Jean-Claude Van Damme is no longer the unstoppable force of his youth. The kicks are slower, the stunts more measured, but the spirit remains unbroken. He has learned that true strength is not found in muscles or fame, but in the willingness to keep fighting, even when the world has moved on. His story is not just one of action and adventure, but of survival, forgiveness, and the relentless pursuit of hope. For those who grew up watching his movies, Jean-Claude's journey is a reminder that heroes are not born, they are made, forged in the fires of adversity, and shaped by the choices they make when no one is watching. The tragedy of his life is not in the falls, but in the courage to rise again, to face the world with open eyes and an open heart. And in that, Jean-Claude Van Damme remains a legend, not just on the screen, but in life itself. As Jean-Claude Van Damme entered his 60s, the world began to see a different side of the action star. The bravado and bravura of his early years had softened into something more reflective, more vulnerable. He was no longer just the muscles from Brussels. He was a man who had lived, lost, and learned. The years had etched lines on his face, but they had also brought wisdom, humility, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters. In interviews, Jean-Claude spoke candidly about the cost of fame. He admitted that the pursuit of stardom had left him isolated, sometimes even estranged from those he loved most. The endless cycle of filming, traveling, and promoting had taken him away from his children, from his roots, from the simple joys of everyday life. He confessed to moments of regret, wishing he had been a better father, a more present friend, a more grounded man. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, the sorrow of a man who had gained the world, but sometimes felt he had lost himself. Yet there was also gratitude. Jean-Claude knew how rare it was to get a second chance, to be able to look back and make amends. He worked hard to rebuild relationships with his children, reaching out with honesty and humility. He spent more time with his family, cherishing the moments that fame had once stolen. The man who had once been defined by his absences now found meaning in simply being there, at birthdays, at dinners, at quiet evenings at home. Professionally, Jean-Claude embraced his legacy. He became a mentor to younger actors, sharing the lessons he had learned the hard way. He appeared at fan conventions, not as a distant star but as a grateful survivor, eager to connect with those who had supported him through every high and low. He took pride in his journey, scars and all, and encouraged others to do the same. "Don't be ashamed of your past," he would say. "It's what makes you who you are." But life continued to test him. The physical toll of decades in martial arts and action films could not be ignored. Jean-Claude underwent multiple surgeries to repair old injuries, knees, hips, shoulders, all reminders of the price he had paid for his art. The training that once came so easily now required discipline and patience. He adapted his routines, focusing on health and longevity, rather than sheer power. The days of pushing his body to the limit were over. Now it was about preservation, about honoring the vessel that had carried him through so much. Despite the challenges, Jean-Claude never lost his sense of humor or his love for life. He remained a showman, always ready with a story, a joke, or a signature high kick, albeit a little slower than before. He found joy in the small things, a walk with his dog, a quiet morning coffee, a heartfelt conversation with a fan. The man who had once chased the spotlight now found contentment in its gentle glow. Yet the world's fascination with his struggles never faded. Every new wrinkle, every candid confession, became fodder for headlines and speculation. Some saw only the tragedy, the fallen star, the faded hero. But those who looked closer saw something far more powerful. A man who had faced his demons and survived, who had turned pain into purpose, who had learned to forgive himself and others. At 64, Jean-Claude Van Damme's story is not one of defeat, but of transformation. He is living proof that it is never too late to change, to heal, to start again. His journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of redemption, and to the enduring hope that no matter how many times we fall, we can always rise. As the years have passed, Jean-Claude Van Damme has become more than just a movie star. He has become a symbol of perseverance, a living lesson in the art of survival. The world that once idolized his physical prowess now admires his emotional strength. Fans who grew up watching his films now see themselves in his struggles, his regrets, and his relentless hope. The man who once seemed larger than life is now in many ways more relatable than ever. Jean-Claude's later years have been marked by a quiet kind of heroism. He has used his platform to speak out about mental health, addiction, and the importance of seeking help. He has shared his story not to seek sympathy, but to offer solidarity to those who feel alone in their battles. "We are all fighting something," he often says. "The important thing is to keep fighting, to never give up on yourself." His openness has inspired countless people to confront their own challenges, to believe that change is possible, no matter how far they have fallen. He has also found new ways to express his creativity. Jean-Claude has taken on roles that challenge the stereotypes of his past, embracing characters with depth, vulnerability, and complexity. He has appeared in comedies, dramas, and even self-parodies, showing a willingness to laugh at himself and to evolve as an artist. His willingness to take risks, to step outside his comfort zone, has earned him a new generation of fans and the respect of critics who once dismissed him. But perhaps the most profound change has been in his personal life. Jean-Claude has worked tirelessly to mend the relationships that were once fractured by fame and addiction. He has become a more present father, a more attentive friend, and a more grounded human being. The man who once chased validation from the world now finds it in the eyes of his loved ones, in the quiet moments that fame can never buy. He has also embraced his roots, returning to Belgium often to reconnect with his family and his past. The boy who once felt out of place in Brussels now walks its streets with pride, grateful for the journey that brought him home. He supports local charities, mentors young athletes, and uses his influence to give back to the community that shaped him. For Jean-Claude, success is no longer measured in box office numbers or magazine covers, but in the lives he touches and the legacy he leaves behind. Yet even as he finds peace, the shadows of his past are never far away. The pain of old injuries, the memories of lost opportunities, the scars of addiction and heartbreak, they linger, reminders of a life lived at full throttle. But Jean-Claude has learned to carry these burdens with grace. He knows that true strength is not the absence of pain, but the ability to move forward in spite of it. At 64, Jean-Claude Van Damme stands as a testament to the power of resilience. His story is not just about the rise and fall of a Hollywood star, but about the enduring hope that lives in all of us. He has shown that it is possible to fall, to break, to lose everything, and still find a way to heal, to grow, to love again. The tragedy of his life is not in the mistakes he made, but in the courage he found to face them, to learn from them, and to become something greater because of them. For anyone who has ever felt lost, broken, or forgotten, Jean-Claude's journey is a beacon of hope. It is a reminder that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will come. And when it does, we can choose to rise, to fight, and to write a new chapter, one filled with forgiveness, gratitude, and the quiet strength that comes from never giving up. Now, as Jean-Claude Van Damme stands at 64, his story is more than just a tale of action and adventure. It is a living testament to the complexity of the human spirit. The world still remembers the high kicks, the splits, the iconic fight scenes that defined a generation. But those who look closer see a man who has weathered storms that no camera could ever capture. The tragedy of Jean-Claude Van Damme is not in his falls, but in the depth of his journey, the heartbreaks, the losses, and the quiet victories that never made the headlines. He lives today with a sense of gratitude that only comes from having lost and regained everything that matters. The spotlight is softer now, the crowd's a little smaller, but the love he receives is deeper, more genuine. Fans approach him not just for autographs but for advice, for encouragement, for a moment of connection with someone who has faced the darkness and found his way back to the light. Jean-Claude embraces these moments, knowing that his greatest legacy is not in the films he made, but in the lives he has touched. His days are filled with a new kind of purpose. He continues to train not for the next big role, but for health, for clarity, for the discipline that has always anchored him. He spends time with his children, cherishing the laughter, the conversations, the simple presence of family. He travels not as a star but as a student of life, eager to learn, to grow, to experience the world with open eyes and an open heart. The man who once chased fame now finds joy in the ordinary, in a walk through the park, a meal with friends, a quiet evening at home. Yet the shadows remain. There are days when the old pain resurfaces, when the weight of regret threatens to pull him under. But Jean-Claude has learned to face these moments with honesty and acceptance. He knows that healing is not a destination, but a journey, a daily choice to forgive, to let go, to move forward. He speaks openly about his struggles, reminding others that it is okay to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to admit that you are not invincible. In doing so, he has become a different kind of hero, one who inspires not through feats of strength, but through acts of courage and compassion. The world may never fully understand the battles Jean-Claude Van Damme has fought, the tears he has shed, the nights he has spent alone with his thoughts. But those who have followed his journey know that his greatest triumph is not in the roles he played, but in the man he has become. He is a survivor, a fighter, a father, a friend. He is proof that it is never too late to change, to heal, to start again. As he looks to the future, Jean-Claude remains hopeful. He dreams of new projects, new adventures, new ways to give back. He knows that time is precious, that every day is a gift, and that the true measure of a life is not in what you achieve, but in how you love, how you forgive, and how you rise after every fall. The tragedy of his story is not in its heartbreak, but in its beauty, the beauty of a man who refused to be broken, who found meaning in the struggle, and who continues to inspire others to do the same. So if you find yourself moved by Jean-Claude Van Damme's journey, if you see your own struggles reflected in his story, remember this: you are not alone. The path to healing is never easy, but it is always possible. Like Jean-Claude, you can choose to rise, to fight, to believe in second chances. And when you do, you become part of a legacy that is greater than any movie, any trophy, any fleeting moment of fame. Share your thoughts below. Has Jean-Claude's story touched your heart? What battles have you faced, and how have you found the strength to keep going? Your words may be the hope someone else needs, a reminder that even in our darkest hours, we can find the courage to stand, to heal, and to write a new ending.